Today what I'd like to talk about is a solution to one of the world's greatest problems, and that is a world without genocide. But before I go into the specific solutions, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. 4 of my grandparents are Holocaust survivors. My mother's parents were able to flee when the Nazis took over Austria and were able to get refuge in the United Kingdom. And there they raised a family, had 3 daughters. The middle one's my mother, who was born and raised in Glasgow. And she hated the weather and came to Southern California when she was 17. On my father's side, his parents went to the concentration camps. And near the end of the war, they tried to get refuge here in the United States, but were denied entry. They tried Cuba and were denied entry. And finally made their way to Ecuador in South America. And there they got married and had a son, my dad, who was born and raised in the capital, Quito. My dad was visiting Los Angeles, met my mom, and they decided to raise a family in Ecuador. So I grew up for 18 years in the capital of Ecuador, belonged to the one synagogue in the country made up of about 100 Jewish families. And everyone was a survivor, descendant of survivors. And all the time, the elders, many of whom had the numbers still tattooed on their arms, reminded the congregation of 2 critical lessons. 1, never forget what happened where 6 million Jews and 5 million others were systematically exterminated for who they were. And 2, and is equally as important, never ever let it happen again. Doesn't matter if you're Scottish, American, Jewish, Ecuadorian, never allow people to be targeted. I was fortunate to immigrate to the United States, and in 2004, like all of you, the United States government, for the first time ever in history, declared a conflict a genocide, what was happening in Darfur, Sudan. And hopefully, like all of you, I refuse to be a bystander to genocide. I wanted to be an upstander to genocide. And I knew that Sudan was not the only country in the world where people are being systematically targeted for extermination on a widespread basis, and started to see that there were other places. And I wanted to know what I could do to help. And I came across this Pulitzer Prize-winning book that I encourage you all to read by a woman, Samantha Power. It's called A Problem from Hell. And she looked at all the genocides of the 20th century and asked, why does the United States fail to keep up to its promise of never again? And what will it take to ensure it can keep that promise? And we found 3 basic conclusions to what it'll take: protection, political will, and permanency. Protection is we need to stop treating genocide as a humanitarian crisis and start treating it like a security crisis and focus on protecting innocent civilians. Political will is, as we've heard with many speakers before, is politicians are good at talking but not good at acting. So how do we create the political cost for inaction and change that equation? And third, how can we create a permanent anti-genocide constituency, like a firehouse? Because every time the genocide is over, and a new one comes up, we always have to start from ground zero. So we need to create a permanent institution of Americans ready to respond to. So we created a very strategic, results-oriented approach on how to abolish genocide, focusing primarily on political advocacy and having main tools, including a 1-800 number, Darfur Scores, and a constituency. I'll briefly describe them and then give you a great story of how we've used it successfully. So the first one is we created the first scorecard for every member of Congress on how they have responded to the genocide in Darfur. How have they voted on legislation? How have they co-sponsored? Have they been to the area of conflict? And gave them a letter grade, A through F, and explained how they got that grade and what they needed to do to get an A, and made it publicly available so anyone across the country can hold their policymakers accountable. To make it even easier, we created a 1-800 number called 1-800-GENOCIDE. Anyone who calls this phone number, all you have to do is enter your 5-digit zip code, and our system will identify your representative, your senators, or give you the option to call the White House. Whatever option you pick, we will give you the specific action items. So if Mel Martinez has co-sponsored, but Bill Nelson hasn't, we will tell you what each one does and then connect you for free to their office so you as a constituent can tell them what to do. So we used this. A great success was in there was a bill called the Darfur Peace and Accountability Act, and Senator Richard Lugar from Indiana was the chair of the committee. And he wasn't putting the bill on the agenda. So we went on Google Maps and we typed in church and synagogue and college and mobilized Indianans across the states. And they organized and went to his offices and said, we're from Indiana, we're Hoosiers, we know what's happening in Darfur, and we want to see you put this bill on the agenda. So he could never use the excuse that his constituents didn't push him to do something. The second tool is, as with every politician, they need voters, they also need donors. So he went to this website called opensecrets.org and got his top 200 donors and used whitepages.com and cold called these donors. And we said, I know you gave $1,243 to Senator Lugar. I want you to hang up, call 1-800-GENOCIDE, and tell Senator Lugar to put this bill on the agenda. And 2 weeks after we did this combination of district office visits and calling donors, Senator Lugar put the bill on the agenda, and the United States Senate passed the Darfur Peace and Accountability Act. Another project that we're doing is humanitarian aid is good and necessary, but we want to protect people. And one of our projects, fortunate for Echoing Green Foundation, we met a challenge grant, and we were able to purchase 100 radios and work with a former U.S. Army Ranger and carry over radios into eastern Burma to create an early warning network. And multiple villages have already reported they have successfully been able to escape or better embrace for attacks when the government of Burma is targeting them for extermination. So what we're launching this year, which is really exciting, is we've teamed up with former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright and former Secretary of Defense William Cohen to look at very specific ways, not just to react to genocide, but how do we prevent it? And so they produced this amazing blueprint with 34 very specific recommendations on how the United States government and many other governments can do to get ahead of the curve and prevent genocide. So we are launching a genocide prevention campaign and introducing legislation and are working with the White House to help prevent genocide. So hopefully all of you can join me and join the first permanent anti-genocide movement so we can make Never Again be more than this empty promise, but an actual commitment we can keep. Thank you.